Welcome to Stepdad Success, turning the tide on the way stepdads are seen and show up in the world. We're a new breed of leaders raising leaders. Blood or no blood, we raise them as our own. We're connected, loving, and committed to leading them into the future. If you asked a normal dad, he'd say we're doing the impossible. He'd say, but they're not yours. How do you do it? Yet every day, stepdads around the world are forging the way. That's what we call Stepdad Success. We're leaders raising leaders. And these are our stories.
Welcome, everybody. This is James Klobasser again with Stepdad Success and Leaders Raising Leaders. We've got another interview today, a guy by the name of William Worthington. And I bumped into William through the Brotherhood, through the Warrior Brotherhood. And William is actually a professor, I believe, at Baylor University in Texas. Now, I wish I had him on video. We could probably see him with a big hat and boots on, maybe a horse. How are you, William? Are you there, mate?
I am, James. I'm ready. No horse, but I got a big belt buckle, if that helps.
Awesome, mate. Awesome. Yeah, actually, I was just going to say, most of our guys have had a really strong accent, but I don't sense a strong Texan accent from you.
Well, now that you brought it up, it'll probably sneak in here along the way.
Excellent, mate. Excellent. It's more than welcome. Great to have you on. Mate, if I could just get you to give us a quick background on yourself. I said you're a professor there at Baylor University. You're also, you've had a lot to do with strategic management in business and family business, and also run a business by the name of the King's Council, and you can find William's book on Amazon, I believe, the King's Council. So maybe you can just give us a quick background on yourself, William, and then we'll dive in a bit further.
Sure. Degreed in engineering and spent about 7 or 8 years in engineering project management work in Houston, Texas, and a little bit down the road, I guess I got sort of a chip on my shoulder wondering why I was working so hard for somebody else, so I kind of launched my own business and set up a front company for my family's business to handle the field engineering and sales end of what they did. And they were up in the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area. So I moved up there shortly after my mother's death to sort of, kind of come alongside my father a little bit, who was aging rapidly over the grief of the loss of my mother. And it was also a time for me. It just felt like it was time for a change. And so it was that 7-8 year itch thing, I guess. So I moved up there, set up the company, did 100% commission sales work for about 7 years on that arena. Doors opened up that I wasn't expecting to pick up an MBA along the way in the evening. That opened the door to academia, which I certainly never saw coming. My whole family grew up working for a living, so academia was not ever on the horizon, but that opportunity came up and I took it. Went and got the PhD, and then after that ended up getting an academic position here, and have been faculty at Baylor University for the last decade in the Entrepreneurship department.
Wow, that must be exciting. I have played in the online space for the last 20 years, and full time for the last 10 years. You must hear about all sorts of inventions and ideas and all sorts of things being in that entrepreneurship space.
It's fun. The difference between being an entrepreneur and being in the academic side of it is I don't have to, I'm not limited or siloed to just my thing. I get to expand and kind of absorb the whole realm a little bit. So that's been a ton of fun. I've really enjoyed it. Having said that, I did feel the need to launch the King's Council, which is it's pretty much what I do on campus, but opened up to a broader market space for business owners out there, what have you. And for the council, the way the council is spelled is it's really meant to be, just to come alongside advisory, a private advisory, if you will, opening up peer opportunities and what have you. So it's been a very enjoyable thing. Along the way, I met a lady and really fell in love with her, and she had three boys already, and we've had since 2 of our own, and so hence our meeting up here in the Brotherhood, because basically I went from single guy to married with 3 children on the same day, and that was a slight adjustment.
I was going to say, mate, that's always a topic of conversation here. just those initial meetings. And I know that obviously, I'm sure you met the kids well before the actual wedding day, but how did those, I would hope so. How did those initial meetings go with the kids, and how old were they?
We talked, Sarah and I talked about that prior to that moment. She was obviously nervous about that, and you hear all the horror stories and what have you. And so we wanted to be careful to make sure that our relationship was clearly moving forward, and that part of the relationship was important to test, although we didn't really know what that meant, or we didn't know what the boundaries were in terms of the results that we were going to need to see or not. And so one day we just decided to pull that trigger and see what happens. And I remember the day I showed up at her house, and the three boys were up on the stairwell, and they slowly slinked down the steps, wondering what was around the corner. They'd heard my voice. They knew of me. They'd heard about me. They'd certainly seen a change in the countenance of their mom, and so they were kind of curious what this future thing was going to hold. They didn't know what to do during this meeting, but one of them had a football in their hand, and so that was my ticket outside. American football, just so we're clear, Sure. So we went outside and we had a catch, and the journey began.
Yeah, awesome. And how was that kind of next, month, 2 months? How did they respond to you, and how did that dynamic kind of play out?
I think what they knew clearly was that I was enamored by their mother, and that there was no question in their mind, or in her mind for that matter, how I felt about her, and and they saw it through action and words. So they knew what I was saying. They heard what I said, but they also saw what I did. And so I'm old school, old fashioned. And so I opened the door for her, gave her a hug and kiss. She was my number one priority long before we were actually married. I was treating her as a wife, with the dignity and respect, that sort of thing. That was important to me. It was important to my upbringing, and it just came natural. I think they saw that. They saw the fact that she always felt comfortable and confident and, loved long before the wedding day. And I think that they triggered off of that, I think they sensed peace inside of her soul as a result of these interactions, and that spoke to them. And it formed the premise for our relationship moving forward, too, that our relationship was going to be based on that husband and wife relationship being the most important relationship on the earth, and that everything else was going to come secondary to that, including the relationship with our own children, if need be, which is somewhat controversial, yet to us it's a biblical premise, and we were following it strictly and lovingly, and we just felt like that was the model that we were going to follow. It was the one that we were going to lead with, and it's the one that we've been doing so for the last 8 years.
Sure. It sounds like you've come from a fairly stable family. You've obviously got strong sort of values and morals in place. I can tell just, from the, opening the door for your lady, that's kind of an old kind of, I guess, tradition that doesn't get used enough these days, I don't think. I'm still fairly old school, so I kind of, I appreciate all those little things like that. Tell me, what was your upbringing like? Like, are you, a lot of, everyone comes from different, some might be rough. My personal stories, came from a very rough upbringing, and that's part of the reason why I've started this podcast. But tell me about yours.
Dad was an amazing husband and father, so I had it modeled well for me. And many times in moments of indecision or emotional ups and downs, I would kind of go back and remember how did he handle various situations and see if I couldn't mimic them or duplicate them. I think what was missing is he never really explained that. It's not like he ever taught me how to be a husband or taught me how to be a father. But he did model it. And of course that was pretty massively important. I was the firstborn son, so I didn't have older brothers or sisters to learn from. He was the primary learning center. He worked very hard, so he wasn't home a lot. He traveled a lot and he worked many hours, and so he wasn't there. But when he was there, I held him on a high pedestal, still do to this day. I don't know whether that's, some people would consider that healthy or not, but I certainly do, and still respect him to this day. I think if I missed anything, it would be the teaching to go along with it. So it's the thing I try to implement today to my children and to my stepchildren, which I don't really distinguish, by the way. Maybe it's a future topic here, but I don't really divide how I parent based upon whether they're a quote unquote birth child or quote unquote stepchild. But I do try to incorporate a lot of teaching and training along the way to kind of get them to where they need to be, so that they not only see it being modeled for them, but they have it explained too. And I'm, of course, not always perfect with any of that. And even when I screw up and say things I wish I hadn't said or do things I wish I hadn't done, I try to be good at going back and swallowing my pride and admitting that and saying, hey, you saw something, you heard something I wish you hadn't seen or heard, and this is why. And, I'm human too. And when we try to move on and use it as a teaching tool, I don't do a very good job of that. I'm trying to do a better job of that. I'm still at the point where I'd rather just say, do this and do that because I said so. It's so much easier.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, because obviously I've been interviewing a lot of stepdads, and just hearing your conversation, I'm thinking, wow, he's really got it together, and yet you kind of think you can be doing it better. I think it's all relative in how we parent, and obviously we all do our best with what we have. You mentioned there, that you don't kind of separate your kids from your stepkids. That's a big thing for me as well. That there's that conversation around blood or no blood. And I think, as I've mentioned, kids are precious. I think they believe they should have the best that they can have. Tell me, what's it, was that like that from day one? Have you always thought, oh, I'm going to have kids in my life? And, did you ever think that you would have stepkids? Just talk a little bit around that, that concept of looking after your biological kids as well as stepkids.
For me, it's always been, my intent was always to treat them as if they were my own. I had two pictures in my head. One, I'm the new puppy that comes along into their household, or B, I've wrapped them into my world and, made them part of my kingdom, if you will, and B, one out. I wasn't going to play a second fiddle in any sense. I never tried to replace their father. That was never the intent. Some situations have occurred that have caused separation between some of them and their birth father, but that had nothing to do directly with me. I think it had to do with some of his jealousy of what he saw us building, but that's kind of on his end. I never tried to insert myself in that manner. I think the problems that led to their divorce are the same problems that are leading to their estrangement with his children, but that's a whole other topic, and it's just my conjecture because I don't understand everything that's going on there. But I never wanted to separate them. I always wanted to treat them as if they were my own. It's always been that way. And I've never hesitated to issue correction when it needed to be there. There are times when I, kind of invoke a lot of time with Sarah before that happens, just to make sure I'm, that we're on the same page. But, I don't get a lot of, I get it every now and then, but I haven't gotten a whole lot of, well, you're not my dad and you don't have the right to do this, that, and the other thing. It's come up with each of them at some point, but it usually quickly goes away, thankfully, and we roll with it pretty good.
I was going to say, William, what sort of ages does that stuff come up? Like, because this is the thing, on the podcast, there's all sort of different stepdads listening. There's going to be, people that have been in it for a long time, people that haven't, people with young kids, people with older kids. What age group did you kind of have those challenges of, you're not my dad and that sort of thing? I've been in a relationship 7 years. The boys are 8 and 10 now. I'm kind of, I hear that conversation and I'm hoping it doesn't come up, but I'm pretty sure that it will one day. There'll be something.
Yeah, it'll probably come up because they're human beings, and sometimes we reach and we stretch for some lever that we can pull to get what we want, and that one's sitting out there. As I don't think they understand how vicious a comment that is at their age. I don't think they can understand the level of commitment and the work that you put into that relationship over and above, it's much more difficult to build that relationship at the stepdad level than it is at the biological dad level, because you have all these other influences that are spewing into their brain, and you don't get to control those other voices, at least not of course, like you said, there's a lot of different permutations here, but in mine, their dad is in the picture, and he's very actively in their picture, and that's not necessarily a good thing because he's not a whole person to begin with, and so that becomes very problematic. So when they when they go on visitation for a week or a month, we get them back, and it's almost like we have to rewire them almost from this craziness that they come back with, and that's just part of the charge that we have. But to answer your question, their ages now are 15 and 14 and 12, or soon to be 12, and then the two younger ones are ours, and so they go down to 6 years old and 4 years old. So we have a pretty wide range group. It's a busy, crazy, chaotic household.
I was going to say that is a crazy household. How's the dynamic between the kids? Like, how do they get along? Yeah, I've always found kids really flexible. How do they, how are they dealing with having, or how are the three boys dealing with having littler ones now?
They're fine with it. It's always been pretty good. As a matter of fact, our oldest one has had quite a bit of conflict with his biological father, and when that began, that started increasing his own conflict with his two brothers. Right. So oddly enough, he's been getting along with our biological children better than he's been getting along with his own biological brothers. And so it's always a mix. It's a crazy blend in there. And so the third child, is somewhere in between. There's a little bit of both of that. And the second one seems he's either very well adjusted or he's swallowing everything, all the way around, and has another issue building somewhere that we need to deal with. I'm not sure how to tell the difference at this point, but we're watching for that one. But they all get along really well, and our two youngest ones adore their older brothers. There's no question there.
You mentioned a couple of times, their father's in the picture. Does he see the kids much? Is there like a routine? Like for us here, we're week on, week off, and we know that transition times can be difficult. Is there a regularity to the how they see their biological father, and just are they? What's that relationship, that dynamic like with the boys also?
Yeah, it's pretty well structured here, at least in the state of Texas. And so we have custody and he has visitation rights. And what that translates into, because we're within 100 miles of one another, he gets to see them on Thursday afternoons after school, and he can keep them all the way to Friday morning if he chooses, which he never does. He always drops them back off at the house. And then he sees them every first, third, and fifth weekend, which starts Friday after school and ends the following Monday. And so he could take them for that whole weekend, which again, he never does. He has certain and then during the summer, there's a split there, and that's somewhat flexible. We've handled that multiple different ways, but in essence, he gets them for a whole month in the summertime, plus some other weekends. And there's a mix and a blend. Generally speaking, it works fine. We either take them down or he comes and picks them up, depending upon what the situation is. And they go and they simply, go and visit with him and his household, and they stay there, and then they come back. And for the most part, it's been okay. Every now and then, I think the struggles that he's having in his own life spew out into theirs. When he has financial troubles, he complains about paying child support, and he weaves these young kids into the conversation about finances, which I wish he wouldn't do.
Sure.
Well, the oldest one's probably ready to start having that conversation, but they certainly weren't ready to have that 8 years ago when this started. And it comes up constantly, and what it does is it builds a feeling of guilt inside of their lives, where they feel like there's sort of a weight that's being dragged around between us, and
Yeah,
a lot of guilt.
I was just going to stop you there. And these little conversations that we have off the cuff create massive holes later. I think it's
Yeah.
important the way you brought that up there, that he's kind of venting his feelings. I'm sure he's probably not meaning to weigh this guilt upon them, but inadvertently he is, and that's going to affect the boys later down the track. I kind of bring this up again just to reiterate that these little conversations that we have all the time, we have to be careful. We have to be careful what we're kind of placing into their minds, because it doesn't always come out the same as, he's probably thinking, oh, I just need to make some more money, but they're thinking, wow, I'm a burden. There's two totally different conversations being heard there.
Yeah, there sure are, and those can be devastating as they add up over time. And I get that he needs to vent, but when you're the adult, you don't vent to an 8-year-old, you don't vent to a 4-year-old. You gut it up, and you vent to your spouse. You go somewhere else, to your inner circle. I mean, you don't be venting that kind of stuff to a young person who doesn't have the maturity to be able to handle it, much less give you a hug and help you out of it. That's not how this works. So when they get older, and by the way, so once he starts down that path of venting about money, then there's usually all kinds of other things that go along with it, things that are said, lies that are told about their mother, or lies that are told about me. Fast forward 8 years, these kids start realizing who's been speaking lies and who has not been venting at all or speaking falsehoods, and that starts to separate them. They start realizing, well, wait a minute, this is pretty one-sided in the opposite direction.
Yeah. I hear about this. I was just going to say, I hear about this a lot in these conversations, and this is why I reiterate, the conversations that we have with our kids create their futures. And, the premise of this podcast is leaders raising leaders, and being able to control some of those conversations within ourselves so that we're not leaving, stains on our children. It's an important topic, and I'm glad, you've brought it up there, and just, I can see you've got your head around it, but there may be people out there listening that do have these conversations out in public or out in open with the kids, and it's something that we need to be careful about, as far as raising a leader that's confident and has a solid self-worth, things like that.
I think the hardest thing to stay with that one is, as a stepfather, and I know how much work I put into trying to build and stabilize this blended family, and so when my stepsons do something wrong or something they shouldn't do, the very first thing I'll tend to do is to take that personally for some reason, as if I had failed as a stepfather, or failed as a father, period, or failed as a parent.
Right.
And then I want to lash out, and I think what Sarah and I have discussed several times, and I have stacked this many times, meaning I've thought about it and systematically walked through this quite a few times, and
Sure.
Unfortunately I'm still not good at remembering this in the moment. But what we've kind of discovered and figured out is that it's not that we're responsible for the moment. I mean, in the moment in which they're screwing up or doing something they shouldn't do or behaving in a way they shouldn't behave, that moment isn't our responsibility. Our responsibility is to train them in the way in which they should go, and they shall not fall far from it. And the idea being that when they're in their 20s and they're in their 30s, they'll have this systematic background of training that we've been putting into their head over and over and over again. There's going to be a lot of victories and a lot of defeats along the way. But in the aggregate, when it's down the road, they're going to have a lot to pull from. And I think the positives will outgrow the negatives. And the negatives aren't bad either, because it shows them that we were human too. And when it's all said and done, I think they'll be well equipped to be good parents themselves, and whether that be step parent or otherwise. Although I'm trying to spend a whole lot of time teaching them to get it right the first time, so that they can avoid. I'd rather them avoid this having to be a step parent. I think they need to get the marriage down right the first time. But I was married before, and Sarah was obviously married before. So we've committed errors ourselves. We're trying to get them to model and understand what that relationship should look like up front, so that they don't have to go down that path. And part of that is dealing with conflict. How do you handle conflict? Because it's going to come up. It's not like there's going to ever be a relationship without it. And so we're trying to teach them how to handle that conflict and how to resolve it as you go through it. Now, gosh, we're not perfect at it. Certainly I'm not. I got way too much Irish in me to do this well.
It sounds like you're doing okay. Mate, yeah, it is. It isn't an easy road. And there is as a stepdad, we're looking at it from a different perspective. The kids are looking at us from a different perspective. And I know that a lot of kids are very flexible and they just take you on as a dad. And it's a beautiful thing to watch because the kids, I think, are much more pliable and much more, I don't want to say pliable, but much more accepting and able to be flexible than us as adults. And it's really great to see kids being able to almost trying to look for the right word here, but almost, I'll go back and just say, they're so accepting that we often overlook that. And, we have our own judgments and our own things that we get stuck in. And like you say, you just mentioned the stack, and I haven't talked about that on the podcast yet, but the stack is a tool that we use within the warrior training to kind of vent and I would say pull the insights from our own anger. So that we can let go of that anger and move past it. But, it's interesting the way kids are able to do that on the fly almost. Obviously, as they get older, they start to hang on to stuff like adults like ourselves. Tell me, for you, William, what's been the biggest shift personally in just being a stepdad? What have you had to let go of? What have you had to learn? What's been the big one for you?
I think for me, 8 years ago, I kind of walked away from the business side of things extensively. I had stabilized a life where I could get away with, like a 45-hour week, gusting to 50. And that's down from, a 60 or 70 or 80-hour week. And I just sort of walked away from those hours in order to invest time in the family part, because I'd heard so many horror stories and, you see it all over the place. And we were already starting off with a handicapped, so with a blended family, at least that's how I felt. And so I wanted to make sure that I was going to overcompensate for that somehow by shoring up the bulwark there and spend a lot of time with the kids and a lot of time with my wife and be home for dinner every single night. And that meant a lot of opportunities had to go away. A lot of opportunity to travel and consult kind of had to be put to the wayside, which means walking away from a lot of opportunities to put money into our account. So we had to streamline things. And then when we got to the point where we got married and brought everybody under one roof, we sharpened the pencil even more and brought her home because we had at least 2 kids. And especially when we were talking about getting pregnant and having one of our own, the cost of childcare here in the U.S., I'm sure it's everywhere, was just outrageous. And it was it was cheaper to bring her home than to keep her out in the workforce and try to pay for all this childcare. So we did, but of course that meant that now we're down to one income. And it was healthy enough to keep the food on the table, but it's not like it was healthy enough to go do whatever we wanted to do anytime we wanted to go do it. And so now that they're older and a little bit more stabilized, I might be shifting back a little bit more, which is kind of where the warrior thing came into play for me, as I kind of revamped and rebooted a little bit to expand my own kingdom, if you will. But I think that was the biggest thing to let go, because I was so work oriented. It was hard to walk away from that and go into something I was far less comfortable with, which was this family role. Sure. And learned a lot, though.
Yeah, it's is there kind of one key thing there that stands out for you that like you had to let go of to push forward personally, like we all kind of have these humps, these hurdles or challenges that we come up against. Has there been a big one for you?
Yeah, I think what I mentioned earlier about letting go a little bit and realizing that these kids are a work in progress, just like we are. And that I cannot sit here and take personally if they go down a wrong path or do something I wish they hadn't done or say something that they shouldn't have said. I don't need to be taking that moment personally. Just because they screw up for a few minutes doesn't define who they are. And I kind of am quick to do that and then take personal responsibility for it and then lash out myself, and it becomes this ugly snow spiral downward. I think that's the biggest thing and I still haven't learned. I can't say that I completely learned it, because I still every now and then catch myself in the middle of that spin down, and I have to stop myself and step back and take a deep breath and kind of regain control a little bit. But that was a big one. And certainly the other one was confirming the importance of why a three-corded strand is not easily broken, and why it's so important to invest in date night, for example, with my queen, and spend time with her to make sure that we are on the same page at all times. I think the greatest gift that Sarah and I give to those children is our relationship. They see it modeled, they know it's real, they know it's genuine, authentic, all the other buzzwords. We live it. We don't just teach it, talk about it, read about it, whatever. We live it, and they see it. And I think that's been a huge step forward for us, and a way in which we've been able to crawl through an awful lot of ugly times in our own life. And we tend to want to shield the kids so much. And something I didn't mention before, and for the last 15 months, I've been fighting a cancer that has threatened my life. And so when you've got kids with an age bracket going from 4 years old to 15, you don't communicate all the information to all the kids at that level. Like you say, leaders leading leaders, you disseminate information carefully to those who can handle that information. And then you have to, kind of pay attention even after that to what they're sharing with their siblings. And so I don't have one of the cancers that you for sure will recover from. I have the one that for sure is going to be a struggle, whether or not you survive it or not. It looks like we're on top of it. I think we've won, which I'm thrilled to say. But that's 15 months of a whole lot of struggle and stress, not only on finances, but timing. And, we're disappearing down in Houston to MD Anderson quite a bit. We're spending we spent a lot of time down there handling that. And the kids got bounced around back and forth between grandparents and babysitters and whatnot. And overall, though, now that we're coming out on the other side, they have handled things well. And a lot of them, especially my stepsons, the older ones, the older other children have matured quite a bit, especially the oldest two. And I've been proud of what I've been seeing through it all.
Yeah. I hope you don't mind, William, just diving back into that topic around the cancer. And I didn't know that. So I really appreciate you sharing that, because it is a disease that is common, across the globe now. And I'm just wondering, how are the kids reacting to that being in the conversation now? Because, as you say, it's and I guess none of us get out of this life alive, but when something comes in to possibly shorten that life, it must put a lot of stress on the family, a lot of stress on yourself, and it just is. Do you mind sharing just a little bit of how the kids are dealing with that and that conversation, because that is a conversation that will come up for the other dads?
It will. After the phone rang and it was the doctor announcing the diagnosis, it took a while for me to fully absorb what that was going to mean and what it was going to entail in the coming months. And but when I did so, kind of in talking with Sarah and through a whole lot of soul searching and prayer and whatnot, my world boiled down to two things. I had two objectives, and two only. The first one was that I was going to war. It was going to be mortal combat between me and cancer, and one of us was going to die, period. And number two, I was going to provide for my family no matter what during that time, as long as I could. Everything else in my world, everything in my life, every relationship, every project, every volunteer event, everything else that was on my plate was slaughtered. I killed it. I removed it, killed it instantly. And I lived that way for the last 15 months for the most part, and stuck with that. And both objectives were made and were successfully accomplished. We killed the cancer, moved on from it rather, and then and provided for my family the cancer is a rough one. The chemotherapy, I should say, is a very aggressive regimen. And my physician told me I needed to stop work and go on disability and all this other stuff. And I told her that was unacceptable. That was not going to happen. And that period, it just wasn't going to work. And
Sure.
Stayed employed the whole time. Didn't miss, I missed days of work. I missed weeks of work. But I was able to invent and innovate new technologies that are out there to make work possible, even through hospital stays and through all kinds of crazy stuff, and made it happen. So on the kid side of it, though, older kids know more than younger kids. The 4-year-old doesn't know anything. The 4-year-old's just looking for the next party. He's really
Sure.
not.
Yeah. Yeah.
He doesn't get any of that. The 6-year-old, my daughter, she's a lot more sensitive to these sorts of things, and so there's a lot more fear inside of her heart about what this might mean, but she can't really fully grasp it, and it comes out from time to time in ways that I don't fully understand. But she too is protected from a lot of the gory details, and she certainly didn't see anything or hear anything, to the best of my knowledge anyway, that would trigger more nightmares than she's already had to deal with. But then as you step up to the older boys, they know more, have seen more, have dealt with more. I think the telling thing was when, after several cycles of chemotherapy and then a surgery and amputation and all kinds of stuff that went along with it, I tried to get back out on the track and go running again, something I had done quite a bit of. And, the boys were excited to go running with me, and I took them on the run. But, we got out there on that run, and I could have run miles before cancer, but after cancer, that's not the way it worked. I mean, the chemotherapy had just done its damage. And so I ran, it probably wasn't 20 yards I would run, and then I would have to stop and gasp for air, and they were running behind me, and they went silent because they'd never seen this before. This was the big Irishman in the house. Suddenly,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
he can't run 30 yards without collapsing.
Wow.
And they did not know what to do with that picture in front of them. And so I think that moment and that day, it changed a little bit to them. I think they stepped up from that point on and realized, holy cow, they could suddenly be the men of the house if this thing continues the way it was going. Fortunately, the strength's starting to come back a lot more. And, so I think that picture's getting a little bit better. But it was a pivotal moment for them. And I think they learned a lot. And I think for the first time, they understood that, holy cow, life isn't always there. And it can change on a dime.
Wow. Yeah, thanks very much for sharing that, mate. I've been fairly blessed. I've been fairly healthy all my life. I'm 46 years old. I've been very sporty, and I can actually feel for you there with the running conversation there. Being a runner, I'm a runner as well. I love it. It's kind of my meditation. But when you go through something, and I've been fairly lucky, I've got a little bit of a back injury that's been hanging around, that's been stopping me run. But, being in that situation where, you're fit, you're healthy, all of a sudden things change, and then you kind of lose one of your passions, it's kind of tough. And like you say, the boys seeing that, it puts a different light on life, doesn't it?
Yeah, it sure does. But that's part of life is learning about life and the fact that it can be fleeting. And so I'm not grateful to have gone down this path, but one of the things that got picked up along the way, I think, is a good lesson for them.
Yeah, it's certainly, I want to say character building, but these things, the challenges kind of teach us different things in life. As I mentioned earlier, my upbringing is quite rough, so I don't want to repeat that. We learn different things through life, and they kind of get played out in our kids. They say that I think it was Stephen Covey that said, in teaching our kids, we're teaching our grandkids. So we have to, like I keep saying, we have to be careful of what we're actually teaching them, and teaching them about strength, teaching them about facing challenges head on. And you sounded very stoic and very confident around your challenge of tackling this cancer and beating it, which is fantastic. But it's probably not hard for other people in a different situation to be really challenged by that. But we've got to pass down those values to our kids.
Well, the walk was a difficult one, and I've cut some videos, and I've never really organized them in a way to share them out there, but I have burned a few and wrote scripts for many more, not really knowing what to do with it. I just sort of started those videos as a way of handling what was going on. And I was telling a mentor of mine I had lunch with today, I'm just trying to struggle with whether or not I should put those out there and for whoever, because maybe everybody's situation is so radically different. I don't know what the video can do to help medically, but I do know that regardless of what kind of cancer or what kind of medical condition you have, that's not where the battle is going to come from. The battle is going to happen between the eardrums, and that war between those 6 inches is the one you have to win no matter what. And that's the war. That's the one place where I went to war on right there. Was those mindsets, and that's where I needed to be. And Warrior found its way into my life halfway into that journey, and was very helpful to help bolster that up. And before that, I kind of was on my own a little bit, trying to find out ways of doing that and ways of articulating it. But that's how the war started, was winning that one first. That way, regardless of whether the battle of life was won or lost, the war was won regardless. And that was the premise. It walked into all the other stuff that happened during that war.
Yeah,
a whole lot of it, which was unpleasant. It was all still based upon that same idea that we've won this war no matter what, and this is our mindset. We're gonna tear it up. We're gonna win it. This is hand-to-hand combat, and I'm gonna win.
Yeah, I think that's super important, William. I think that's just something we need to instill in our kids, that our attitude is what plays probably the biggest role in life. I can tell just by talking to you, you're confident, you come from a nice background, and you've got your values solid in your life, and you've got sounds like an upbeat. I would not have picked that you had a cancer just from your attitude. And I think that it says a lot about you. It says a lot about the way you lead your life, and it obviously says a lot about the way you're raising your kids as well. So, it's, hat off to you. But at the same time, it's like, we need to be passing these things down to our kids. Now, I'm sure you obviously are. When we live things, they get passed down naturally. But for the people out there listening, our attitude is super important, and we know it in ourselves that when we're confident, things go well. When we're lacking that, things become a struggle. Tell me, in your life, what's been your biggest challenge as far as dealing with the stepkids?
I think the biggest challenge for me was dealing with the craziness that comes along with the biological father out there weighing in on us, because he's acting there's so much craziness that he brings to the table, and having to walk through that in a manner that is still honoring of the rest of our life, and not allowing that to take over all the other great things that are happening in our life. I think that's been our biggest struggle together. Fortunately, Sarah and I are really good at teaming up. We're excellent partners, and we do so many things together. That weekly date night thing has been a big deal, and we manage that relationship. We protect that relationship. That's our primary relationship to protect, and I think everything else spawns from that. For me lately, I think that as the cancer thing is beginning to lift, and I still have a few more cycles of chemo to go through, but the side effects are starting to taper off a little bit. The severity of the chemo that I'm on now is much less than it was the last phase or the phase before that, and so I'm able to be at work all the time now, and I'm reawakening that whole side of me. So those two brands are on fire now. So for me, having to put them aside for so many years, as well as my hobbies, I put all my hobbies aside. I haven't done anything on the hobby side for 8 years. People ask me, what do you do for fun? I'm like, well, I immediately go to my calendar to see what the kids are doing this week. Because what do I do for fun? I go to this Little League baseball game or this basketball game or this soccer game. I mean, what the heck? What are you doing? What are you talking about? What kind of a question is that?
William, I'll just stop you there, mate. On a couple of episodes, and even in the Brotherhood yesterday that you're obviously a part of with me, I did post some videos of surfing. So don't forget to have fun. I've done the same thing, and I've forgotten to have fun for years myself. But don't forget to have some fun. Get those hobbies back out.
Oh, I appreciate your video. I watched it and I was cracking up watching you do it, because I mean I'm sitting there watching the video going like, I'm just asking, fun. I don't even know how to spell it anymore. So I'm desperately, I can't believe I'm saying it, but I really am sitting here going, I don't know. I mean, I'm just lost on that one.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to read. I just subscribed to Flying Magazine. It's been a lifelong dream to become a pilot and get back in the air.
Nice.
So, I want to do that. Of course, naturally the things that I want to do are expensive, right? I mean, it's not like it's a cheap thing I want to do. It's always more money.
Sure.
So, it's going to be $10,000 to get a pilot's license at some point. So I'm not looking forward to spending more money. But by the same token, that's where Warrior kept in too. That business was the main reason I stepped in there, was to reawaken that and get that flowing again. And oddly enough, I got these two brands. I love going to work. I love doing what I do. I love being a professor at university. I'm building a consultancy not to leave what I do day in and day out. I'm building a consultancy so that I can stay.
Sure.
Doing what I do day in and day out, because the university is never going to be able to afford paying me what I'm worth or paying me what I want in order to achieve all the goals that I have.
Sure.
So I will build this business on the side in order to be able to afford to stay, because I thoroughly enjoy it.
Sure. I'll send you over. Obviously I've spent a lot of time online. I've built many big businesses online. I'll send you over a copy of my book, William, that'll give you some ideas. I've dealt with a lot of experts, kind of consultants, coaches, that sort of stuff. So I'll send that over to you. You can have a bit of a read. That might help you along the way. But,
Love it. Appreciate it.
William, I'll wrap this up here now. But mate, thanks very much for being on. Thanks for sharing. I really appreciate the time and just what you've shared today. Tell me, do you have one parting thought for any stepdads out there? Is there one lesson that you'd like to pass on? Is there just some last words from you, mate?
I think anybody listening has already started to take the steps to any advice that I'd give, which is to understand two things. You're not alone. You're surrounded by people who are also stepdads. And so, check your ego at the door. Number two, go find information to help you to improve what you're doing. It doesn't make any sense to me that you'd spend thousands of dollars getting a college degree, for example, and then turn around and then that's it. That's the last time you invest in yourself. There's an awful lot of opportunities to invest in yourself out there. I mean, you and I have invested a lot into this Warrior program for a reason. This isn't the only program that you can invest in. There's lots of other ways that you can invest in yourself. But I do believe, the adage that floats around our world is that you are your number one asset. I couldn't agree more that there's just absolutely no greater return on investment than what it is you're going to invest in yourself. And that doesn't mean newer fishing poles or a new boat. That means the things that are going to improve and sharpen your mindsets and skill sets so that you can perform better in the marketplace, perform better as a husband, perform better as a father, get your spirituality right, get your body weaponized, the whole 9 yards. I mean, that kind of sums it up. And I don't think you have to feel guilty about finding ways and finding people, by the way, to associate with who also want to sharpen their skills in those four arenas and making that happen.
Very true, mate. Very true. Once again, thanks so much. I'd love to have you back on at some stage in the future, William, and just talk more about a few things you've mentioned today. But we'll wrap it up there today. We've been going a little while. Again, thanks very much. Great to have you on, and I look forward to staying in touch.
James, it's been a pleasure. It's been an honor to be here. Thank you.
Would you like to learn more about how stepdads across the globe are joining forces in raising the next generation of leaders? Then head to www.stepdadsuccess.com and grab all the show notes plus a copy of the brand new tactical guide for creating more happiness, health, wealth, and wisdom as a stepdad. And if you liked the podcast, please share it with other stepdads you know and leave us a review on iTunes. Again, that's www.stepdadsuccess.com for all the show notes and tactical guide. Come and join the new breed of stepdads, the growing group of leaders raising leaders.